Hi guys, welcome to Fascinated by Fungi Live. Today I'm going to be speaking with William Padilla Brown, or Myceliation. He has recently published a book on Cordyceps cultivation. It's a second version of the book, and I'm really excited to have him. He's an incredible farmer, artist, rapper. He just put it on an album too. I'm super stoked to talk to him. I think you guys are going to really enjoy our conversation. The format of this is going to be that I'm mostly just going to talk to William. I'll keep an eye on the chat and try to integrate any relevant comments into the conversation. And then maybe at the end, we'll take a few minutes to directly address questions. But I hope you guys enjoy. I'm going to take a second here to get William on the horn, if I can. Let's see, Myceliation. Uh-oh, William's not on here yet. All right, well, if there's any questions you guys have, I'll take a minute or two, answer those. Happy to talk to you guys and take a minute for William to show up here. I gave him all the instructions, so hopefully he knows what he's doing. And also, let's hope, fingers crossed, last time I did this, Instagram deleted my conversation and also spazzed out halfway through, so hopefully I don't have to deal with that. There's William. Okay, we're going to go live. So I hope you guys enjoy our conversation, and come on, Instagram, you can do it. There it is.
What's
What's up,
up?
William? How you doing,
How's it
man?
going? Doing good. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, we
Cool.
got you good. This is great.
Nice.
Hi, how are you? It's nice to like digitally meet you. It's pretty cool that, we can do this these days.
Yeah. I'm chilling, man. No complaints. Life's been pretty good.
Yeah, I've been following you for a long time, and I think there's been a real evolution from what I've seen from you, coming of the ways that you're expressing yourself, all the incredible projects you do in the garden, you cook, you rap, you do just an insane number of things. You're like definitely a Renaissance man. And I don't know that much about your background other than that you're basically self-made and you didn't go to school for any of this stuff, and you're doing high level, DNA sequencing and PCR and all sorts of stuff without necessarily an official background in molecular biology. Can you sort of share with us and anyone who's watching what that journey was like a little bit for you, and kind of some of the ways you got to where you are now?
Word. Do you want this stream to be like censored, or do you want like the full like raw story of how this happened?
I always like full and raw, man. That's fine by me. If there's any kids watching, you can close yours. But yeah, man, let's hear it. What you got? What you got for us?
Right on. I mean, it's been a long journey. The whole like delving into the science end of things probably started when I dropped out of high school. I always traveled a lot when I was younger, and like through different countries, different states. Like my dad was in the army, my mom worked for the Department of Agriculture, Foreign Affairs.
Gotcha.
So like I was always all over the place, and the curriculums never really matched up. So whenever I was in high school, I was like, I went from a really basic public high school here in Pennsylvania to one of the best schools in Taiwan.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was like going from like middle school to college. Like that's what the jump was like. So like I wasn't able to learn. It was too much. And I dropped out of high school. And I always tell people I dropped out of school because it was interfering with my education. Like there were things that I wanted to learn, but I wasn't able to learn through that kind of like environment.
Yeah.
And whenever I dropped out, I was just like focused on rap music. And I told myself, probably when I was 16, when I dropped out of school, I was like, all right, I don't want to get left behind. If I'm not making money from music by the time I'm 18, I need to do something else. So probably around the time I was like 17, 18, I started to like learn about like magic mushrooms and stuff like that. And honestly, like I tried them, and I had never been on a hike before. My
Hmm.
parents both aren't very like outdoorsy. My mom like still won't go on a hike with me. She's like afraid of the woods. So like I delved into that a little bit, and it was like the first time I actually saw nature. It's the first time I saw trees. Like
Mm.
it was just like it was like background noise to me before. And like I always tell people, you don't see mushrooms until you see mushrooms. Like you have to like actively be like searching them out before you
Right.
actually notice that they're there. Um, so at that point in time, through those experiences, I felt like it was really important to be close to the source of what I'm made of. So I felt it was like imperative to grow my food.
Mm.
Um, so I started figuring out how to like grow my own food, and like I taught myself how to grow my own mushrooms. And then I had a kid when I was like,
what was your intro mushroom that you grew for the first one?
I'd rather not. Probably
Not
oyster
those
mushrooms.
oyster mushrooms.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
yeah, yeah.
edible ones.
Oysters. Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely oyster mushrooms. I was just
Yeah.
making fun.
Oh,
But yeah, yeah. So I had a kid when I was 20, and like whenever my kid was born, I was like, all right, this kid didn't choose to be born into this world and like choose to be born into like an impoverished situation. Like I was like really scraping to like pay for everything. And I was like, I want to be able to give him good food. So I was like, the only way I can do that is if I grow it, and like I want to be able to give him a good life, and I have to figure out how to like escape this trap. So I started like researching really hard, like how to grow mushrooms and like how to take it to the next level. And I started my own mushroom farm in 2015. And then I wanted to like, I was really, like all the heady science was really enticing to me. And I wanted to understand what it meant. It sounded like a foreign language a lot of the time.
hmm.
So I just
Oh,
watched lots of
it
like,
definitely is.
yeah, it's like a whole different language. So like I
Yeah.
just watched lots of YouTube videos. I read lots of books and I just applied everything as soon as I got into it. And eventually I figured out how to do everything else that I do.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty incredible because I think, for anyone watching who feels like they don't know where to start, that's kind of the story of it. You don't need any kind of educational background necessarily to get into this stuff. You just need to be passionate and motivated. And I think
Hmm.
you had both of those things, and that shows, because you've learned a lot over the years, and then you've definitely like taking your science up several notches too by, you know, integrating all the things that you've learned together and advancing the field too. I mean, you've done incredible work here with these cordyceps cultivation books. I think you're sort of setting the standard, at least for American cordyceps cultivation, because we know that they've been doing it in China for a long time. But a lot of that is with Ophiocordyceps and is very different strains and is very rooted in traditional Chinese medicine. And I think you put a flag in the ground and said, hey, this is America. I'm going to grow them here. I'm going to select like local strains. And that's something I've always been really interested in. Is I see you out in the woods finding, primarily seems like they're on cicadas, and I'm pretty sure it's all Cordyceps militaris. I think I'm saying that right.
Um,
What's been your sort of process in going out and finding those things and selecting stuff, and just what's your rationale for all of it?
um, so mostly what I'm looking for is Cordyceps militaris. I have found and experimented with Ophiocordyceps ravenelli.
Hmm.
And I have found a couple cordyceps species that were unidentifiable by experts,
Mm.
but that was like I only taught myself how to do molecular biology last winter, so that was last year that I found the unidentifiable ones, and I didn't know how to do the DNA work yet.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I find a lot of Cordyceps militaris, and they're mostly on Lepidopteran pupa, so it's like moth pupa for the most part. Um, and I mean, yeah, it's like three different species of moth pupa that are the most common things to find them on. Occasionally, we'll find them on larvae. My friend Jeff has found them on like wasps out in Western Pennsylvania, which is like completely out of their realm. Cordyceps militaris is the most successful cordyceps because it can grow on over 50 different species of insects, but mostly in Lepidoptera and Coleoptera. So that's like butterflies, moths, and beetles.
Okay.
Um, and Yeah, so I go out there, I find the wild cordyceps growing. I bring them back to the lab. I isolate ascospores from them. Then I
Are
grow out the
they're ascomycetes? Yeah.
yeah, they're
Yeah, okay,
ascomycetes.
that
Yeah.
makes for anyone like ascomycetes versus basidiomycetes. Most of these mushrooms on the poster behind me are basidiomycetes, and then ascomycetes tend to be smaller little cup fungi and truffles and stuff like cordyceps. So
Hmm. Yeah, ascomycetes are pretty freaking
they're
cool.
really cool.
Um, yeah, so I isolate ascospores. I grow out mono ascospore cultures, so that means that they're not paired yet. So they're just like they're haploid still.
Okay.
Um, and whenever they're in the mono ascospore phase, I do DNA extraction and amplification of from the mycelium to figure out what their mating type is, basically if they're a boy
Mm,
or a girl.
how many
Um,
mating types? Yeah, because like I'm familiar with yeast, so I came from A and alpha, but then I know
mhm.
stuff like the beach polypore and Schizophilum commune have like 27,000 different genders or mating types. So like
Yeah.
fungi could be a little out there.
Hmm. Cordyceps have three mating types, but there's only two mating type locus. Um,
Okay.
and so there's two on the one and one on the other one, and the two can pair with the other one, but the two can't pair with themselves. Um, so I test for like the one locus, and then I test for the other locus as well. And then once I figure out what they are, then I pair them together and breed out commercial genetics that I sell on my website.
Cool.
Um,
Were those primers
yeah.
that you designed, or were you using some ones that were sort of commercially available already?
No, no. I found the primers in some Korean research paper. Um, I'm like a big Google Scholar nerd. I like
Yeah.
love going through Google Scholar and like checking for updates on different things. And I found this Korean research paper on cordyceps breeding, and they had the mat primers on there. That's what it's like. Mat one and mat two is what
Hmm.
the basic names for the primers. So I copied and pasted the primer code from the research paper, and I got them synthesized by IDT DNA, and then they just send them to my house. I have to have my LL I have an LLC, or else I
Hmm.
wouldn't be able to just get them sent to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool, man. I mean, that's pretty impressive, and it's like a great proof of concept that you didn't need to have like the skills to go in and know what your like GT ratios were or annealing temperatures. You could basically just take something that existed in the literature, order that exact sequence, and then start working, uh,
Yeah,
which
and
is awesome.
the whole like PCR, like how much time I have to anneal and like denature and like all of that it was in that research paper. So like I didn't even have to, otherwise I would have ran it like an internal transcribed spacer sequence
Hmm.
in the PCR, but it's pretty similar. I mean, honestly, like a lot of it is pretty similar, but I
Yeah.
was really happy to be able to have that.
Cool. And so I've seen you do lab work. I think there was sort of an infamous TikTok video that blew up of you doing lab work, which I always love seeing people do lab work, but again, it's sort of frustrating that everyone's first assumption is that you're doing something illegal by cultivating a mushroom, and you're growing cordyceps and you have a legitimate business and have,
Yeah.
you know, proven yourself to be an educator, an entrepreneur, all of these things, and yet the first thing that people assume is bad stuff, and that's a shame. And that's I think one of the things that I'm hoping to do with my account is help open the world's eyes to the fact that all mushrooms are magical in some ways, and all mushrooms are cool and deserve equal respect and treatment in the eyes of humans. And so that, you know, Psilocybin species are great. They're really cool. They can be very inspiring, as I think, you know, you and I have both seen, but there's no reason to sort of always assume that they're magical. So with your
Yeah.
lab setup, you think you got a new house pretty recently, and like, what was
Yeah.
the process of kind of building your lab out? What were you looking for?
This is probably like the fourth time I've built a lab in a regular house, so I've gotten pretty like savvy with it. Um, and luckily, I usually do it in the basement because it's cooler, and I like to keep a cool temperature without having to like maintain AC and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and in the basement in this new house that I moved into, there was the framework for a room down there. It just was missing one wall, so we put in um, like two by fours, or like I'm not savvy with like uh,
Yeah.
construction stuff, but we put in
You build some stuff.
yeah, we
I
put
don't
in
know
some
either.
wood, and we like made a frame for one wall, and then we put plastic panda film like up on the walls and the inside
Hmm.
to keep it clean. It's easier to clean that. Like I can
Hmm.
spray it down and clean it. And then we built a positive pressure air intake for the room. So there's constantly clean air that's going through a filter that's being pushed into the room. So if
Hmm.
there is any like cracks or crevices where air could come in with potential mold spores or contaminants, the air is always going out. And then I have two big like um, two by four HEPA filters
Hmm.
um, that I set up, and I have the one that I have I really like is a fan filter unit, a sealing unit for hospitals, and it has a fan built into it. So that's what I use to do all my clean work in front of. Um, and yeah, I mean, I just set it up. I put my tables in. I have my mini fridge for culture storage, and then I've been collecting equipment over the years, mostly from like auctions from different colleges
Hmm.
and my friend Josiah, he runs this company in Oakland called the Odin, and he always has like lab equipment for sale. So I bought stuff from him and eBay, just wherever I can find what I need.
Yeah.
Right now, I really need fluorometer to quantify DNA so that I can do sequencing because I got a nanopore sequencer.
Hmm.
But it's expensive to run nanopore sequencing, and I don't want to like run it if I don't know that I have enough DNA in my
You
sample.
just need like a nano drop, basically. I've used,
Yeah.
yeah. If anyone who's ever worked in a molecular biology lab, basically when if you extract DNA or run primers or do a PCR or something, you take a tiny droplet, put it on this thing, it runs some light through it, and it gives you a wavelength, and from that wavelength you can infer how much DNA is present and whether or not you should keep wasting your time on this little piece of plastic tube kind of thing. But someone out there has got to have an extra nano drop because labs shut down all the time. So if you have
Mhm.
one, someone to William, he will make good use of it.
Yeah, I definitely will make good use of it.
Yeah, I'm just amazed because I do come from an academic background. My dad's an MIT professor, and I grew up with being in labs, but it always seemed uh, kind of like not an ivory tower in like an exclusive way, but in a way that you needed to have grant money, you needed to have lab managers, you needed to have all sorts of connections to various parts of the industry to source this equipment, to put it in somewhere. You need to have all these regulations and everything else. And my mind has been blown by seeing guys like you who are doing what's, effectively bootstrap biology. You are slapping together a lab and doing really high level work basically on your own. And it's so cool to me. And I have so much respect for what you're doing. And I hope that it's inspiring people all over the place to know that they could go pursue this level of science. And, it's fine to do academia. It's great, but like not everything can happen in the academic space because funding is limited now more than ever. I think the respect for scientists in society has plummeted partially because of our political climate. And that's a real shame. I hope we can try to resurrect some trust in scientists and hope that, we can bring education back and make it available for everybody. But it is amazing that you can just go out and do it on your own. So I'm going to ask you a couple of fairly pointed questions about cordyceps, and feel free to tell me to piss off if it's, too much. But um, I think we should start by addressing the elephant in the room when it comes to cordyceps and talk about Last of Us, which is
Ah,
a video game series that a lot of people are really into. And I haven't played it. I assume it's fun. But the premise is basically that a cordyceps fungus mutates and somehow starts invading humans and then turns us into these crazy, like, rabid Stranger Thing type demagogue and, zombie things that attack people and eat them and also turn them into cordyceps monsters. So I've always said, hey, I don't think that would ever happen because cordyceps are very specific to their insect hosts. And then I found out that Militolaris can infect up to like 50 different species. And I said, oh, crap, maybe that's not the case. Do you have any feelings about, how or why, like, what do you think of Last of Us? And how often do you get that comment on any of your content?
dude, all the time. Especially like now that I've like delved into the TikTok world because like for the most part, most of the people that follow me on Instagram are like educated to the extent where they even found me. But like on TikTok, you can put up like I put up a video of me dancing with a chicken and got 50,000 followers. Like, you know what I mean?
I
Like it
know,
took me
I love
like
that video. It's the vibe
yeah,
is.
it's on point, you know. I figured out how to finesse it a little bit, and then I stopped doing that and started posting real stuff. But like, um, uh, so like it's different on there because it's just so open. But like on Instagram, like it's more like I feel like more curated. I don't know if that's the
Mhm.
right word, but
No,
like
it definitely
yeah,
curated is the right word for Instagram, and that's something that I
yeah,
like and dislike about the platform at the same time. Is I feel like
hmm
you don't get as much realness out of people because it's like you have to define everything by like the one little like
yeah.
piece of information you put out there, and you can't post too much or too little or.
hmm
Uh,
So like now that I'm on TikTok, more people are like, "Oh, Last of Us, Last of Us." But
yeah,
like on Instagram, people follow me because they're looking for the cordyceps stuff and they already know to some extent what's up with it. Um, and you know, people ask me all the time, like, "Do you think cordyceps are going to infect humans, or like, do you think that you're infected and you're just spreading it?" And I'm always like, yes. I'm like,
yes,
yeah, I'm
definitely.
infected 100%, and like that's the reason why I go around teaching everybody how to grow them so I can spread it. Um, but honestly, they're super like I mean most cordyceps species or most opiocordyceps species or Talipocladium or Elaphia cordyceps um, are very specific. Like Cordyceps militaris is like the only one. It's like one of the only ones that grows on different host species like that. But it's always like insects. Like insects are extremely different than warm-blooded creatures or even
Right.
cold-blooded like amphibians and reptiles. Like, so it would take a lot of like genetic mutations and like I don't even think I don't even think at this point in time you could genetically engineer in a lifetime a cordyceps that would be capable of like infecting a cold-blooded or warm-blooded animal.
Right.
So like I don't see any time in like literally generations, and it would honestly take somebody actually engineering it to be able to do that kind of thing. Um, so yeah, it's hard to explain that to people that already don't really know much about
Yeah.
science and stuff.
I find
Yeah.
that breakdown definitely when you start trying to like explain some of the bigger concepts to people and you're like, oh, you don't even know what DNA is. So it's gonna be hard to explain to you like how immune systems work. And I was just reading a paper where I was like trying to understand the infection mechanism a little bit, and it was talking about like the conidia and like the spore falling on the insect and forming all these like super peroxidase enzymes to help melt through the like chitin shell and then accessing the hemolymph, and then this like cascade of gene expression changes that happen. And like as far as I understand it too, and you correct me if you know more, but like the mycelium kind of grows into the body of the bug through the hemolymph such that like up to like 40 to 60% of something of the bug can actually be mycelium on the inside. And so like the movement of the bug as it climbs certain areas is actually like hydraulic pressure from the mycelium like moving the bug along, which is like that's more
Yeah.
than zombie, that's like freaking puppet master, which is just
Yeah. That when I found that out, that was here in Pennsylvania, one of the professors at Penn State actually published the research like 2 years ago. It was very recent
cool.
that the cordyceps aren't like everybody like thought it was taking over their brain and making them move. Like I
Right.
think the puppet master thing is even crazier
Yeah,
because like
seriously.
it would make more sense like if they jack into their brain they can like utilize the nervous system to be aware of their environmental surroundings, but they're not even in the nervous system. It's like muscular control, but they're aware of the environment that's outside of the insect to even be able to move it like that. It's absolutely insane. And another thing I would love to bring up, and it's one of the cooler topics when it comes to cordyceps, is that cordyceps type fungi, and I say that because like so many people classify the traditional Tibetan cordyceps, Ophiocordyceps, as
Hmm.
cordyceps, but it's Ophiocordyceps.
Yeah,
Like Cordyceps militaris is one of very few actual
actual
two
true
genus
cordyceps.
cordyceps. Yeah. Um, but cordyceps type mushrooms are some of the only organisms we know of in nature that can morph. They do this thing
Hmm.
called an anamorph. Um, and the cordyceps will anamorph into two different Cordyceps militaris can anamorph into two different species of common soil mold, Simplicillum and Mechanicillum. And for a long time, I didn't understand why. And then I was talking with Daniel Winkler, who's an international cordyceps expert. He travels to different countries and studies them. And he was telling me that Ophiocordyceps sinensis anamorphs into an endophytic fungus that lives inside of the leaves of the plant that the caterpillar eats. And I'm like, all right,
Oh,
well, these
damn.
mushrooms, yeah, it's so crazy. Like these these mushrooms are producing tiny little ascospores, and like it takes two ascospores to produce fertile mushroom producing mycelium.
Hmm.
And for that to happen on a tiny little bug from a tiny little mushroom is like crazy. So it makes sense that they would morph into a different species. And like then I thought about with militaris, like, oh, militaris turns into a soil mold because the insects bury themselves in their pupation phase, and that's when it would come in contact with them. And then to add layers onto that, when we find Cordyceps militaris in the wild and we're going to bring them to the lab, if the exoskeleton of the pupa is broken, I will never bring that specimen into my lab because there'll be mites inside of it. And the mites are like the STDs of lab world. Like
Yeah.
if you send somebody a petri dish with mites, they're stuck with it. Like the mites crawl through petri dishes. Like the only thing they can't get in is liquid culture. But the mites are super essential in the wild setting because they're actually moving the mycelium through the soil. They eat it and then they move with it.
Then disperse
Um,
it.
yeah, so there's like a lot of different mechanisms of like the way that cordyceps like propagate themselves in a natural environment. And honestly, like that's one of the biggest reasons why I even spent $1,000 and bought a nanopore sequencer out of my own pocket. Like I've never been funded. I've never got a grant or anything. It's always been out of my own pocket. And I went and bought this expensive nanopore sequencer so that I can do full genome sequencing of Cordyceps militaris, so I can get a better understanding. I can do RNA transcription to figure out what is even happening, like because there's so many unknowns still. I don't fully understand the ecological function of Cordyceps militaris in my forest. All of it's based off of assumptions and other research that I've read.
That's so cool. I'm really blown away because I knew a little bit about like telomorph versus anamorph is kind of like clonal versus sexual stages of fungi. And a lot of mushrooms and a lot of fungi in general will go through different phases where they have different parts of their life cycle, and different parts of the life cycle will happen in different areas, whether it's, leaves and soil or it's inside of a bug. And so seeing the cordyceps is kind of this, it's a long story of where this fungus has gone. And then the cordyceps is kind of like the end. Oh my gosh, look at this beautiful fruiting body. But there's so much of that life and that ecology that's happening. And where does it fit in to the role of the forest where you find it? Why is militaris so common on different insects? And that's a super interesting question. I would definitely I want to get you some grant money, man.
Yeah, I want that too.
Yeah, I was talking to the SOMA board last night, and they really want to invite you to be a speaker for our SOMA mycology meeting. So I'll hit you up sometime about that. But SOMA also has a scholarship, so maybe next year we can get you in the application pool and get you some more funding to do more sequencing, because I can't think of anything cooler.
Yeah, that'd be super awesome.
You mentioned media. You mentioned liquid culture. And I guess in my head, I've been sort of, I've looked a little bit at some of the Chinese cultivation papers, and it seems like they're able to grow a lot of stuff in culture, and you can clearly grow stuff in culture, but you're not using like cricket powder necessarily. Can you tell me a little bit about the substrate, the media, the carbon sources, the amino acid, salts, that kind of stuff that goes in? And again, you can say buy my book, but tell me a little bit about the media you use to grow cordyceps on.
I'll start off by my book, but honestly, all right. So when we first started, it was me and my friend Ryan Gates. He runs Terrestrial Fungi. It was really crazy. Like back when I first started, I was trying to get information from the groups that I was in already about mushroom cultivation, and everybody's like, "You can't grow cordyceps. It's just like morels. Like only a couple people know how to do it. They're never going to tell you." And and so like when I first successfully got a clone of cordyceps, which the whole story is absolutely insane because I don't even clone wild cordyceps anymore because there's a really high chance that it will never produce mushrooms. It's like, I don't even know the percentage rate, but like wild clones don't often produce mushrooms. So like the fact that I only found one specimen and cloned it and it produced mushrooms was absolutely insane.
Yeah, lucky from the very start. It was fate, man.
Yeah, it was fate.
That cordyceps got in here.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, when I got the first clone, I offered it for free to anybody that wanted it so that we could figure out how to grow it. And like 5 people wanted it. Now I sell like hundreds of cultures a month, So Ryan was the only person that corresponded with me about it. And he had been in communication with Dr. Anon in Thailand, who had sent him a Thai substrate recipe. And I used that at first, and some of the things was like kind of weird to figure out even where to get it. But then what I did was I connected with my friend Kevin Bachhuber, who started the first USDA organic certified cricket farm for human consumption in the country. And I got from him the nutritional profile of crickets and mealworms. And then I destructured the nutritional profile of crickets and mealworms to create a nutrient substrate that was like the equivalent of an insect.
That's smart, dude. That's clever.
So that I finessed that for a little bit, but then I started to delve more into the research and I started to experiment with things. And then I started the Cordyceps cultivation group once people figured out you can actually do it. And people have been sharing all sorts of crazy recipes on there. But I figured out the main things that you will need, which is a nitrogen source, which they'll break down protein into nitrogen. So like usually their nitrogen source is some source of protein, which I'll typically use nutritional yeast, soy peptone, and now people are using like pea protein powder. So like any kind of like high protein powder. And like if you're going to be growing cordyceps for sale into the health food market, which is what most people are going to want it for, you're going to want to make sure that it's vegan, that it's gluten-free, that it's sugar-free, that it's soy-free, all those things. So like I'll typically use nutritional yeast because it hits all of those marks. And so you need your nitrogen source, you need a mineral supplement. So I've been going to like either kelp meal and glacial rock dust or one or the other. I was using azomite for a while, but people were commenting on the fact that it might be irradiated or like have potential other contaminants in it. So
Hmm.
it's usually either kelp meal or glacial rock dust. But like honestly, at this point in our existence as humans, you're lucky if anything you put in your body isn't contaminated with something.
Yeah, there's
Um,
microplastics everywhere.
in everything, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
everything.
so the mineral supplement, the protein, a sugar, which is like a fast-acting carbon and energy source for them.
Hmm.
So I'll typically use like
Glucose usually, or
yeah, like a malt extract, which is basically like glucose.
dextrose. Yeah, same
Dextrose,
stuff.
yeah. So I'll use malt extract, and I have used basic like glucose or like corn syrup. I've even used before, and then starch as a longer term carbon like breakdown, which will
Hmm.
eventually break down into a sugar through the fermentation process that happens with the exudates and things. So I'll typically do like tapioca or something like that. So starch, protein for nitrogen, mineral supplement, um, and then I'll do magnesium sulfate. I'll do selenium because selenium has been proven to increase some bioactive polymer
Mm.
production. And then occasionally I'll use gibberellic acid because it makes the mycelium grow insane, which is it's interesting because it makes plants grow faster.
Yeah, it's a
Like
plant hormone that
yeah,
stimulates root growth or something like that, right?
yeah, like
Huh.
oxen. I don't know if that's the correct name
Ox,
for it, but
yeah,
oxen
that's
and
the apical. I mean, that's an interesting point because plants and fungi are intimately related, and so I guess it shouldn't be that surprising that a fungus has this like cryptic ability to respond to something that's actually a plant hormone.
mhm.
Because if it was an endophyte in somewhere in its evolutionary history, you'd want it. If the plant was telling its roots to grow, you'd probably want its mycelium to grow too. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought
yeah.
about that.
So the gibberellic acid definitely helps with the mycelium growth, and that's something I just found out last year.
Cool.
But those are just little things I add. But that's mostly it. And then you need like a solid state. So like that's like a liquid broth that you make, and
Hmm.
then you hydrate like some type of grain.
Okay.
So typically it's like brown rice. It's what's cheap and easy to use and nutrient dense. You can grow Cordyceps militaris and get it to produce fruit bodies with just white rice and water, but then it doesn't have all the necessary base compounds or elements or any
Yeah.
whatever that it needs to produce the compounds that you want from it.
Right. It's not as
Um,
nutritionally dense because fungi are very much we are what we eat, and so are they. So give
mhm.
them more complex stuff, they'll produce more interesting secondary chemistry, which is, I think, what you're after when you are
Yeah,
buying cordyceps, right?
yeah, you can get them to hyperproduce. That was another thing I was looking into when I was writing my book. And then I found this thing called the Raven Toolbox or the Raven Toolkit where you can like put in DNA sequences and it'll tell you how it's metabolizing different compounds. And like I've been
Hmm.
trying to figure out how to like work that thing. That'd be pretty cool. It's also expensive.
Yeah.
Um,
Do
but
you
yeah,
quick
so
question? Do you know about the yeast metabolome database?
no.
It's just I can send you the link, but it's YMDB, yeast metabolome. Yeah, and it's a really if you ever have like a compound or an organic acid or something that's a fungal derived metabolite, you can plug it into that and read like a whole history or look up a whole history of papers on that particular metabolite. It might be a
Sweet.
good resource for you as you're like optimizing things and just trying to think about what the hell is this, what is this acid? What does it do in a natural context kind of thing. So.
Hmm. Right
Yeah,
on.
someone said keg too. That's another really good one. But yeah, YMDB is an easy one to start with. Um, so your
Sweet.
workflow is basically you go like liquid media and then you inoculate grain substrate. And then how long is that process to like get it myceliated and bring it to fruiting?
So the myceliation phase or the colonization phase, whatever you'd like to call it, typically takes between 2 and 5 days, depending on how vigorous your
Wow,
strain is. Yeah.
that's fast. Like
Yeah.
most edible mushrooms take like 3 months to like colonize like a little jar kind of thing before it goes to fruit.
I mean, so, like a lot of them are fast. It just depends on how you're doing it.
Mm,
But the way that we inoculate the cordyceps, it increases how fast it goes. Like we typically like squirt a bunch of liquid inoculum into like a sterilized bag. I've been using silicone bags recently, and then you like mix it all up, and then you put it into a bigger container, and then the mycelium's already like all distributed through there, so it's not just like one inoculation point, and it just rips. It rips,
that's awesome.
and then the quicker you like once the mycelium is fully grown through the substrate, the faster that you put it into light, the faster it'll fruit. So typically from inoculation, it takes about 50 to 55 days before you're ready to actually harvest the mushrooms.
That's cool.
Yeah, cordyceps definitely grow a little slower once they're fully like grown through the substrate than like regular gourmet mushrooms, but
Uh-huh.
the turnaround and the profit's way higher than any other mushroom right now,
That's
except for
wild.
truffles.
Also, so truffles are a whole different conversation. Question though, so you mentioned light, and that was something that I hadn't actually heard before. I guess it should be surprising in some ways that fungi are, drawn towards a certain, so they're responding to the photo input. And is there like different types of light that you've played around with, and what is it about the light that you think is making them fruit?
I think it might just be because they're underground and they need to know where to like come out at, and
Head towards that area.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, so they're like plants with their photosensitivity. So like if you have a light only on one side, they'll all grow in the direction of the light.
Mhm.
And then pink light, like blue and red combinations, like pink purple lights, stimulate more cordycepin, cordymin, adenosine production in the mushrooms. I typically use full spectrum fluorescence to initiate pinning, and then I add the blue because like unless you have like super expensive blue red LEDs, like they're not going to be intense enough to make it pin and like start fruiting. But
Mhm.
like once it starts fruiting, then I add the blue and red LEDs and just to increase the active constituents. But I don't have access to analytical labs right now, but I'm working on that.
Mhm.
Then we can have a better understanding of like how to get them to overproduce.
Right, how that affects the composition of the bioactive compound. So you
Mhm.
mentioned cordycepin, which is one that I'm familiar with. Is it's basically an analog of something they'll use in molecular biology a lot. It's cordycepin is a molecule that looks a lot like the base adenosine. So if it gets incorporated into a DNA chain, it's missing the link where you put the next nucleotide base, so it stops DNA transcription.
Mhm.
And so I'm like nervous about people taking this compound as sort of a nutraceutical, because I'm like, well, this thing like should really shut down the activity of fast growing cells. So I'm worried about people's like hair and intestinal cells and stuff like that. From a medical perspective, it makes a lot of sense to say, hey, this compound could be really effective against things that are growing out of control fast. So like viral particles, tumors, stuff like that. But I'm sort of curious about not just the composition of cordycepin, the amount of it, and then clearly we can't fully quantify all that yet. But again, I want to get you funding so you can like make sure that you're quantifying and showing people how much of a particular thing there is, because
Yeah.
that's really important to me too. Because there's a lot of stuff out there in this nutraceutical market where people are like, look at the beta glucans. You're like, yeah, but like, what's in
What
this?
else?
What am
Yeah.
I paying for?
Hmm.
Which I guess gets me to my next idea. Maybe you can speak to a little bit about concentration of bioactive compounds. But what are your thoughts on people selling like mycelium versus fruiting bodies, especially of cordyceps?
All right. So first of all, whenever I've been like trying to push people marking on their labels, and I put it in my book
Mm-hmm.
that nobody should be taking more than a gram of dried cordyceps a day. And even that, like, we really need to figure out the analytics because 1 gram of my cordyceps might contain more or less cordycepin than your gram of cordyceps, depending
Yeah.
on how you grew it and what the strain was. So we really need to figure that out together. But you can take too much cordyceps where it'll have
A negative
unsavory
effect. Yeah.
effects. And
Yeah.
also, as an ascomycete, like morels, you should not eat them raw. Like you should make tea with them or extract them before you consume it. I traded 2 ounces of cordyceps to this raw vegan, a friend of mine. They run this really awesome company called Miami Fruit, and she
Oh,
traded
I know
me.
them. I love their
Yeah.
videos. I'm really close to ordering a huge box of fruit from them.
Oh yeah. I used
I'm
to
so tempted.
I used to talk to a girl that worked there for a little bit, and I hung out down there for a while, and it was a lot of fun. But I connected with them on a really cool level, and they used to trade me cacao pods for
Mm,
cordyceps. And my friend there, she ate 2 ounces of dry cordyceps raw, and she hit
mm,
me up and she's like, "Oh, my stomach's hurting," and da 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 da
yeah.
da. And I was like, "Eat some activated charcoal." Like, I
Yeah.
don't really know
Seriously.
what to tell you. Like, that's
Oh
not
man.
okay. But luckily, she didn't have any like long-term adverse reactions to it. But you really shouldn't eat more than a gram. Um, and Yeah, so as far as like the mycelium and like fruiting bodies thing, I think it's one of the funniest debates ever. Um, because like so many people are like mycelium is bad or da 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 or like the fruiting bodies don't contain like all this stuff. Like and I'm like, ¿por qué no dos? Like why not
Yeah,
both, you
why not
know?
both?
Because like mycelium contains compounds not found in the mushrooms, and mushrooms contain compounds not found in the mycelium. Mycelium contains different levels of certain compounds than the fruiting body does, and because like we're at the point in time where we can have mycelium because like it's like the first time in history in our past couple generations where you can actually consume mycelium because you're not going to go eat wood chips or like dirt, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like we can actually grow the mycelium in a way that you can consume it. There's no reason why we shouldn't be consuming both. I think it's the stupidest debate ever. And the debate is all wrapped around buy my product.
Right.
Like
Right.
buy my product, you know what I mean? I'm like anybody can grow their own mycelium, anybody can grow their own mushrooms. But the one thing, it is safer for people that are growing their own to consume mushrooms over mycelium. I've had the luxury of being involved with Paul Stamets in my work and collaborative efforts with fantastic fungi and things over the past couple of years,
Hmm.
and I've got to see his FDA regulated situation,
Hmm.
and you can grow mycelium and it can be harboring foodborne pathogens. So like
Yes.
I definitely would recommend. I've seen Paul Stamets grow. I could recommend Host Defense because I actually have seen it with my own eyes. And I know the owner of Ohm Mushrooms, and they also
Hmm.
sell mycelium products, and I trust their work as well. Other than that, like, I wouldn't just go buy mycelium powder from random mushroom farms because it can contain foodborne pathogens, especially like when I first started growing cordyceps, I'd eat the mycelium after I fruited it after 55 days of it sitting in light at 65 degrees. I'm like, nah. It took me a minute before I realized, but I was like, oh, that's all mycelium. There's no way there's something, but there can be,
Yeah,
especially after
there
sitting
can
for
be
55
molds and
days.
bacteria. I think listeria
Yeah.
is the big one. That's a threat for mushroom
Hmm.
cultivation. That can shut down an entire mushroom farm, which is I think a lot of people ask me like, why aren't there more mushroom farms? I'm like, well, there's a lot. There's a lot of small ones, but one of the big
Hmm.
challenges is really like making enough money to scale, and then it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing. Is they're small, they can't get big, and then a lot of them eventually have like a food safety issue which can shut them down permanently because it's so hard to come back from that and restart everything. So
Hmm.
it's definitely like a good thing to keep in mind. And I think for me, the mycelium versus fruiting bonding debate is an interesting one. I like your idea of just why not both, but it also like until we have a quantification of the actual bioactive compounds that are in there, and not just beta glucans, but like what are all of the different bioactive compounds and what are the species, how are they quantified, that kind of, and then even an understanding of the effect, because I don't think there's any really good double-blind clinical studies that at least have been done in America. There's a lot of stuff from China, but again, the publication records from China can be, I don't know, a little spotty. I just think as
Yeah.
American scientists, we generally don't have that much confidence in them. So you like to see these things, especially because it's, they're testing people with different diets, different lifestyles, all sorts of stuff like that. So we want to see, data from here. But again, that's challenging because you're not going to get the funding to do studies like that because I
Hmm.
hate to say big pharma, but like look, drug companies are not driven to work on natural products necessarily because there's not as much of a financial benefit for them. And so it falls to citizen scientists and guys like you that are really innovating in this space. And I love to see you do that. So I
Um,
guess, yeah, no, go ahead.
I just wanted to throw in there's an independent lab in Oregon, and like when I say independent, it's just like not part of any university or anything like that, but they're
Hmm.
like high level and they do clinical research.
Oh, cool.
And I wanted to do a clinical study with them for my book, and that's why I was trying to raise a lot of money through Indiegogo, but I didn't even reach like halfway of what I needed. But they quoted me, I think like $20,000 to do a clinical study on what I wanted to do with cordyceps, which I don't really want to talk about because
That's fine. I mean,
I learned my
that's
yeah,
incredibly cheap for a clinical study. So
yeah,
I'm
but
sad that
that's
we
still
couldn't
for
couldn't get
like
you the money, but
for me, man, like shoot, I went from like I don't need to talk about financial stuff, but I
Yeah.
was really hard. I was really in a hard place for a while, but like I
We
still just can't like.
respect the hell out of your hustle, man, and keep hustling. Don't stop.
Yeah.
I know, and I know at one point I gave you a hard time about hustling, but I think that, there's, I guess that brings me to another point I wanted to ask you about. You put yourself out there. You're definitely like, you're the face of what you do. And I think that for me has been challenging at some points to deal with like the mental health issues of what happens when you get criticism, what happens when people come at you and are gatekeeping or doing some form of detracting from the information that you've shared. And like, I've had it really friggin' easy. I can only assume that you've had people come at you really aggressively, probably more aggressively than I did when I gave you a hard time about lion's mane. But what have been some of your experiences with dealing with negativity, dealing with haters, and like clearly you've rose above all of it, and like you are in a really important voice, I think, in the mycology field right now. But how have you dealt with the detractors?
Um. At first it was really weird because I didn't expect to like get where I am. Like it was like always a dream.
Yeah.
Um, but at first, a lot of people were like, "Oh, cool, he's doing something," but I wasn't getting any recognition because like a lot of people were like, "Oh, what does he know?" I'm like a young
Yeah,
like
who's this
kid,
guy? Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
yeah, in my
Well, and even
basement
even when
doing
you're
weird
in
stuff.
in
Like
Fantastic Fungi, you were like, you're young. You look
yeah, that
you
was
look a
years
lot
ago.
older now.
Yeah, that was in like 2017, I think, when we recorded that scene. And like I didn't get facial hair till I was like 24, so like you know what I mean. Like I definitely looked way younger. Um, but yeah, so like before that, nobody really took me seriously for a while, and then when I figured out how to grow cordyceps, I had met Trad Cotter like a year or two before I figured that out, and his wife was following me on Facebook, and she invited me to go teach at Telluride Mushroom Festival. And after I taught at Telluride Mushroom Festival with like some of the biggest mycologists in the world, everybody was like, "Oh, he knows what he's talking about." Da 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 da. But like every now and then, like I don't get like because my work and I show my results of my work and it's legitimate results. Like when I first started doing DNA sequencing, I was getting better results than people that have like a 4-year training in how to do that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
like the results speak for themselves. Nobody could tell me that it's wrong. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Um, but a
Data.
lot of times, like yeah, data. You can't argue with the data. But a lot of times people I lose a lot of followers. Like whenever I was vegan for a long time when I first started doing social media, and whenever I stopped being vegan, I lost 2,000 followers. And at this point, I had like
Man.
7,000 followers. So like
Yeah, that's a
losing
pretty big
2,000 was
hit.
like a big deal. Um, and when I started posting my music on my page, I lost a lot of followers. So like I had to make a separate music page for that. And when I decided to just say screw all of it, and just present myself authentically. And like I hate even using that word because like that's such a marketing hot word right now.
Well,
Like,
yeah,
and
and
we're an
nothing.
authentic
Yeah,
brand.
nothing about
Yeah,
Instagram is necessarily authentic, like we talked about. It's curated.
yeah, hmm
Curated authenticity.
yeah. So I figured at one point I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna stop curating my person because Mycosymbiote is my personal page. I have a Mycosymbiotics page. And I was like,
Hmm.
I'm gonna stop curating my personal page and just show people what my life is like for real. So like I show the ups and the downs and the music and the fun party stuff and the science stuff all on the one page. And like some people, and the biggest thing I get as far as like hating stuff goes, which is not very common anymore, is like this person isn't who he says he is. Like this person is living a materialistic lifestyle. This person doesn't represent the movement or whatever. And I was like, who did I say I was? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like what I
Well, and
did, I'm
seriously,
not,
like you got a nice
yeah.
house and you got a son, and like you're doing like it seems like you're being a good dad, man. That's like what can you do other than provide for your family, right? Like,
Yeah. So like honestly, I don't bother myself with that, and it's not like it's not so upfront in my face. Like people don't leave negative comments. People rarely send me messages that are like mostly people just get mad at me because I suck at shipping my orders out. Like I have some orders sitting right here that should have shipped out a couple days ago. That's mostly what people get mad at me for, which is reasonable. So like I don't really deal with a lot of hate, honestly. Um, yeah. So other than that, I just lose a lot of followers. Like every week I lose at least 300 followers.
Yeah, I know you're sort of on a treadmill. There's this constant trek, and unless you have to keep the positive pressure, because if you don't keep the positive pressure, you start just hemorrhaging, and it's sort
Mm.
of frustrating. I don't totally understand it, but that's
They
I guess
just
that's
want
what
me for
social
my
media is.
vision. They just want the vision. I swear, like when I'm not posting enough, like this is how you do this, this is how you do that. Everybody's like, "Oh, he's not giving me what I came here for. I'm gonna dip." Yeah.
Well, I have no doubt that you being you is going to get a lot more attention. And I think, I like to talk about people, you are a voice of this generation in terms of how we're going to talk to the world about mycology. And I think it's really important to start recognizing who are some of the important leaders, the voices, and the people that will help not just demystify mushrooms, but sort of de-mycophobe America. Because
Hmm.
how many times do people ask you like, "Hey, this mushroom on my lawn, is it going to kill my dog? Should I pull it out and get rid of it?" And you're like, I don't know how to keep explaining to people the difference between like mushrooms versus mycelium. Like removing a mushroom doesn't get rid of the mycelium.
Yeah.
Um, so anyhow, I'll leave that lying. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about your work as a gardener, doing agriculture, and maybe a couple comments on algae. So we're gonna run out of time in like 9 minutes. So give me something kind of quick on that sort of what you've been doing out in the garden.
I try and grow as much food as possible. It was kind of weird moving in here because I moved here in July, so it was like late in the season. But
It's
I've
a
been
little
doing a
yeah.
lot of like urban agriculture work since for like a decade now. Um, and a lot of it is focused on like how do I produce the most nutrient dense food in the smallest place possible? And that's what got me into cultivating spirulina, which is the most nutrient dense
Mm,
food you can go grow in the smallest place possible. So I've been growing spirulina for like 6 years, and I really kind of locked it in over the past couple years to grow an abundance of it. It's 60% protein by weight, produces lots of oxygen. You can grow it on non-fertile land. Like it's one of the best crops you can grow. It grows faster than any other crop, uses less water than any other form of agriculture.
mm.
Um, so I just really try and figure out the best ways to grow diverse food, not use chemicals, like and still keep pests away, which has been an interesting thing with groundhogs this year. And
Always a challenge.
you know, yeah. So yeah, I've been growing food in all different sorts of systems and teaching people all around the country, which has been really interesting because I had to learn how to grow food all around the country.
All the
Um,
different zones and yeah, climates and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah, soil types.
yeah. So gardening is like a really big passion of mine, and like when I wasn't growing food earlier this year, as I was trying to find a new place to live, I felt wrong. Like I felt like some part of me was just not there. So for me, um, it's really about connecting with the land and like uh, um, being true to myself and being a human. Like I don't know if you ever read Dune, but I really
Yeah.
started
Oh
to
yeah.
get into Dune, and it's like that people versus humans kind of thing. Like gardening makes me feel like a human and not just like a person.
Yeah, I,
Yeah.
I, I lived for years, and when I was in grad school, I was in this tiny little apartment, and I kept saying, I'm gonna move out of this place. I'm gonna live in a house so I can have a garden. And I grew up gardening with my dad, and so I felt really connected to the earth. And I'd like going out in the summer, just like eating berries off a bush and popping a couple cherry tomatoes and just eating stuff out of the garden all summer long. And I was forced for many years to live without gardening in my life, and it made me sad. And it was so exciting when I finally got my house here in Napa, planted a garden, and this is like my second year doing it. But I feel, just like you said, so much more of a complete human, and I feel so much more real and connected to the seasons. And I'm eating a bunch of veggies, and I'm like healthier than I've ever been in quarantine, mostly because I'm eating in my garden all the time. So that's really cool. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and very quickly, about mushroom hunting in Pennsylvania, because you do some cool mushroom hunting. And like, what are some of your favorite things to find this time of year? And like, what are some of your
Ooh.
favorite things to cook with those
Um,
mushrooms?
this time of year, cauliflowers are popping. The honey mushrooms
Sporassus,
just
yeah.
started popping, and we're like 2 weeks away, and like it's been raining for like 4 days straight. So
Oh,
we're like
nice, nice.
2, maybe 3 weeks away from maitake season, which is my absolute favorite season. Because in Pennsylvania, like there's a lot of old oak forest, and like on any given day, I can go out and find 100 pounds of maitake and take it out of the forest by myself without putting a dent on what's out there. Like Pennsylvania produces millions of pounds of maitake, and I'm not even like exaggerating that. It's absolutely absurd. Also, there's a lot of chicken in the woods right now, but chicken's like honestly not my favorite. Like Spirasis and Maitake are way,
Or wait, I
way
totally agree. Yeah,
more
those
premier.
polypores are really tasty, and chicken's okay, but it's kind of I feel like I do about real chicken that I don't really like it that much because it's kind of
Yeah.
flavorless. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's a little, it's got that little acidic thing. You can like bread it and fry it, and I did a video about that. But cool.
Yeah.
I've seen you get the Spirasis, and I've been really jealous of that stuff. It looks super tasty.
It's
What's
so
your favorite
good.
way to cook Spirasis?
I tried a really good beef stroganoff. I've done
Mm.
a like a drunken noodle type
Oh yeah,
dish with
yeah.
Spirasis. That's pretty fire. And I really like just cooking it into ground beef. Something about the texture with ground beef together is
Hmm.
really, really good for me.
Yeah. That's
And
I would, yeah.
also,
Go ahead.
oh, I'm like, I know we're running out of time. The Chippewanensis, the porcini, the
Oh,
Boletus
the
Chippewanensis,
is that's the
and
beef bouillon one or
no, not the
no
beef
no.
bouillon one. It's the Eastern porcini. We have Chippewanensis and we
Oh,
have
okay.
Separans,
I
and
think
those
it's
two are
yeah, it's on my poster here somewhere. This is Mad Prof Mashi's poster. That's all like East Coast edibles right there.
yeah. Separans and Chippewanensis are the porcini that we get
Okay.
here, and they are amazing. And this is like kind of tail end for porcini season, which started like a month ago.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited. I got a Spirasis in the fridge that I've been like I got it last week and I'm trying to figure out what I should do with it. I've done carbonara. I love the idea of mixing it with meat because that's one of my favorite things to do is eat a lot less meat but still eat some and just mix your mushrooms into that because texturally when you cook meat and mushrooms together and you eat them, your brain says that they're the same thing. The
Yeah.
flavor's there, the texture's there, and you don't even notice that you just cut your meat consumption in half kind of thing. It's pretty
Hmm.
incredible. So I want to say thank you so much for coming on here, hanging out with me. I know I was really excited to like come to your mycology summit this summer, and unfortunately, it just didn't happen because of COVID. So I'm glad we get a chance to like hang out and talk a little bit like this. And I think I really do think that you're one of the most important mycologists of our generation, and I'm super stoked that you're out there doing what you're doing. Yeah,
Dude.
no, man, take those compliments, and people are going to start laying it on you. You're going to be, I mean, you're already huge, and I think it's funny to think about how we will be recognized as life goes on and more people become aware of mushrooms. But uh, I wanted to say you're a rapper, and I know you can drop some bars. Is there any chance you want to like give us a little like musical outro here? And you have any like
Sure.
wrap up thoughts to share with people?
Yeah, I mean, I could just rap. I mean, for any wrap up thoughts, just follow my social media and keep up with the journey. But I
For
really
sure.
made some cool songs recently. I don't know if I should not say bad words, but there are some like bad words in some of my raps. But um,
You do you, man. Whatever works for you. Also, like, what's the name of your album? Like, tell us what your album is and where they can find it.
I just released an album called Yod, Y-O-D, on all streaming platforms. And my artist name is It's Cosmic. Like you have to put the it's in there as well. But yeah, all my music's on all streaming platforms, and I'm working on a new EP right now with one of my favorite artists from LA right now.
Cool.
But we got 2 minutes left, so I'll give you guys a verse,
Do
and
it.
I'll see you guys in the interwebs. Ceremonial, earth burning, fuck colonial, Shisbury, that's erroneous. Hit that bit with Patronus, breaking all them curses, lotus sipping teas with my G's and Paris and prairies. Got that grass to my knees, we the breeze. And the swag is so sustainable, content so relatable, your values, they're debatable. Reach my height if you're capable. Where I'm at is ineffable, growing all of my vegetables. Carrots all up on me, got them skeptical. I'm ethical and wearing precious linens. Infatuated women be pretending that they with it. They ain't with it. They just tripping. They ain't tripping what I'm tripping because I'm mystic, naturalistic with the vision and I'm handling my business.
Oh,
Yeah.
dude, that was that was fucking awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. That's sick. I'm impressed.
Thanks,
I
man.
knew you had flow. I didn't even flow like that though. That's very impressive.
Yeah, buddy. There's lots in store.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see all the things you're going to be putting out, man. It's really good, super exciting. Yeah, definitely want to get you to come if you can, if you're willing, come talk to Soma. You don't have to go anywhere, just virtual. But I know there's a lot of people out here who are super interested in your work with Cordyceps. I think people are interested in what you're doing in general. That stuff with spirulina is really cool. The way you're doing agriculture is really cool, and I think it's so important to help people understand that food systems should be local. And we could probably talk for another hour about food systems and fungi and how mushrooms tie everything together. And life is really just one giant ecological web that is basically based on fungi. And if we disregard that, of course, we're not doing anything that's sustainable. So it is pretty incredible to see, you know, the way that you're spinning things together, and that much more impressive that, you know, this is all you. Everything that you've earned is very much, I think, due to you, and clearly you got some good people around you, but it is awesome to see what you're doing, and I'm really thankful we had a chance to talk. So
Yeah, hopefully we can do it again sometime soon.
yeah, I look forward to it.
Right on, man.
All right, William, it's been fun. Thanks, dude.
Peace.
Have a good one.
Much love.
Much love.